Hello and welcome to the One-on-One podcast. If you're enjoying the show, consider signing up for the Patreon. There you get ad-free content, early access, exclusive episodes, and monthly supporter hangouts. You can find it at patreon.com/the One-on-One podcast. If you don't like the subscription-based models, there are other ways of supporting the show that are linked in the description. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy this episode.
They said it was forbidden. They said it was dangerous. They were right. Introducing the paranoid American Homunculus Owner's Manual. Dive into the arcane, into the hidden corners of the occult. This isn't just a comic. It's a hidden tome of supernatural power. All original artwork illustrating the groundbreaking research of Juan Ayala, one of the only living homunculologists of our time. Learn how to summon your own homunculus, an enigma wrapped in the fabric of reality itself, their power at your fingertips, their existence, your secret. Explore the mysteries of the Aristotelian, the spiritual, the Paracelsian, the Crowleyan homunculus. Ancient knowledge lost to time, now unearthed in this forbidden tale. This comic book holds truths not meant for the light of day. Knowledge that was buried, feared, and shunned. Are you ready to uncover the hidden? The Paranoid American Homunculus Owner's Manual, not for the faint of heart. Available now from Paranoid American. Get your copy at tjojp.com or paranoidamerican.com today.
Welcome to the One-on-One podcast with your host, Juan Ayala.
That concept ties into like kind of what this alleged group would want, though, because their whole thing is that they think that they can become like God. It's like the original lie that Lucifer told to the angels to get some of them to fall with him, and also the lie in the Garden of Eden to Adam and Eve. Think about what you're saying. You're saying that the products are cheaper and they're designed basically almost to fail at a certain point. So this is where the idea of this group, if they are in control, comes into play even more. It's because they're like basically designing these things it's based on the economy, and World's fairs are actually much older than we know. Like they originated in allegedly the Middle Ages as trade fairs, which were places where merchants would go and they would all meet up together and they would say, is this going to work for a spot to establish a trading post or a city, which is literally what Chicago became, one of the major trading cities in the United States. It's the same concept. So they would all meet up, they would build these buildings, they would do all this stuff. If it worked out, a new city would pop up. If it didn't work out, then maybe one or two guys would stay behind and still have trade with the people around there, and they would build these starforts, which just so happened to fit into the exact criteria of something called a ruse within this oral law, if you want to call it.
Welcome back to another episode of the One-on-One podcast. I'm your host as always. Make sure to follow the show on social media at the One-on-One podcast on pretty much any social media platform, tjojp.com. Also pick up shirts, links in the description. It's on Top Lobster's site. I did sell some shirts last week and I completely forgot to plug it. So for those asking about shirts, you can get it through his website. Links down in the description, patreon.com/the One-on-One podcast, all that good stuff. And today we have, should I say famous or infamous Tartarian truth? Like, what would you say? More infamous, right? I mean,
if anything, yeah.
Welcome, first timer on the show. Not the first time we've podcasted together, but the first time he's been on the One-on-One podcast. What's up, dude?
Appreciate you having me. Just enjoying my day. Took my dogs to the park a little bit ago. Home now, just hanging out. How about you?
Doing all right, dude. I just finished streaming Baldur's Gate 3 before this. So, well, It was mostly just me talking to the chat and not and dying on screen. So, so yeah, for those that want to see me stream, I'm going to try and do it on Wednesdays, twitch.tv/ I think it's the One-on-One Podcast or One-on-One Podcast. Anyways, links down in the description. But yeah, dude, I'm good. I'm excited for this. I've been talking about some of the concepts we talked about on the phone on various episodes, and I figured that we do I guess like an inaugural episode where we kind of cover this idea of false history and what we're being presented nowadays. Because I mean, you can't even trust your own eyeballs now with the AI and everything that's going on. But before we get any deeper into it, bro, can you want to plug your stuff, where people can find you? You have anything you want to shill or plug?
If you're interested in just random research without any conclusions, mostly, I have a channel called Shem where I do history stuff on there. And then if you're into comedy, I have a channel called Tartarian Truth that makes parody videos, but they're completely random depending on what's going on in the world. Nothing too special. I mean, what you're about to hear in this conversation will likely be different than anything that's available from my end. So
yeah.
Might not be worth looking into.
Shoot me your links and I'll post them down too. But yeah, dude, the concept of, because that's where I came across you, obviously through Old World Florida, and that whole debacle that happened with all those videos you guys made. But you've got some pretty solid stuff, and like I said, the conversation that we had not long ago on the phone really rang some bells for me as to how far down the rabbit hole goes. And we were talking, I want to try and do a series. Obviously my mental bandwidth at the moment is consumed with other projects that I'm finishing up hopefully this week. But once that opens up, I want to really dive into Anatoly Fomenko's new Chronology, because I told you I've been doing all these shorts and I've been kind of like blitzkrieging through concepts and ideas, and it's forced me to be able to explain something in 250 words or less usually, right? Because YouTube shorts are a minute, and then all the other platforms are usually the attention span of regular people nowadays is about a minute and a half. So I've been really honing in on my skills of taking a broad concept and breaking it down to its bare bones where I can present it to somebody, explain what that is, and then in between mix, comedy, which is part of your alchemical process as well, and education, because there's something about those two. There's something about, I don't know about you, I know that you have a laborious job where you use your hands and you're moving around and you're listening to stuff, but that to me is a really great tool, and it's helped me. Is like if I'm outside gardening or doing whatever, or doing something around the house, that physical labor as I'm listening to something helps me retain things. Have you experienced that?
I think so, but I can't be 100% sure because there's a lot of things that I'll listen to and I forget completely unless something triggers it. I do think it stores in your brain possibly, and then certain things can trigger the memory, but my memory is also pretty bad, so that's one hard thing. Like I'm not really built for this type of thing. I'm not really built to talk about history and stuff, but I do find it fascinating, and I'm obsessed with it basically. So, but yeah, I mean, I do enjoy doing labor and just listening to stuff throughout the day, and I can find value in almost anything I listen to.
Speaking of which, today is the Illuminati's birthday, bro. It's 5/1. Speaking of fabricated history of groups controlling the narrative and doing all that, I mean, today is 5/1. We're recording this on 5/1. It's the Illuminati's birthday. They were established 5/1, 1776. But nice. This concept of manual labor and, I guess, storytelling, is that maybe perhaps why indigenous people, as hunter-gatherers doing their thing in the field, no technology, or that's why it was oral tradition, because something about working and being in a community or something and telling stories, there's something to like kind of sort of, there's a parallel to be made with that now that I think of it, because not saying that we're slaves or anything, but working in the fields and doing that sort of stuff can kind of stimulate. Because have you ever experienced runner's high? Like after you're done, you have like a...
Yeah, it's been a long time, but yeah, I know what you mean.
You know what I'm saying? So there's something about releasing tension within the body physically and the brain working together. So Anatoly Fomenko, we talked about it a little bit some weeks ago, and it's a subject that has always interested me, except it's very vast. It's a lot of books, it's a lot of reading. But what I appreciate about Fomenko is that, and then for those that go, oh, his stuff can be discredited easily, by a quick. So I was like, no, it's much deeper than that, because I experienced this on an episode I did with Mark, where he's like, so what's so special about it? He's just saying that there's parallels and correlations, and I broke out the charts, right? The diagrams that he does, and obviously it's not 100% they're not 100% identical, but there are a lot of parallels, bro. And the fact that he is saying that, okay, a lot of this history that has been added to our timeline is just regurgitated stories.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting thing about Fomenko, is that he's not necessarily even claiming that what he's saying is true. He's coming at this from a perspective of he wasn't intending to do this research, but he just so happened to be put in this position, and then once he started, he couldn't stop. So a huge misunderstanding that people have about this is they think that Anatoly Fomenko is like one of the only people who's questioning chronology in history, and that he's the only one putting this date. So you just think about this: if every 100 years there's a new historian saying the same exact things Fomenko is saying, at what point does this become an actual issue that deserves some sort of like due process, like people looking into it, not just pushing it off to the side? Because I guess the best explanation I could think of is laziness. But like Fomenko, he's not saying specifically anything that you hear on YouTube about 1,000 years or the millennial reign of Christ or any of that stuff. Like I don't even know really. The only place that's really in the book is in the very beginning in a publisher's note. They say that something along those lines. The publisher says this. So with Fomenko, it's just another example of one of these topics where people just immediately turn it off because it's been, used out of context and corrupted by people who have ulterior motives, as opposed to just looking into history and questioning things.
Well, what are your thoughts? Because the one thing that I have an issue with when it comes to history or anything mainstream, right? It's like, because you and I were talking, and if all this history, this Greek, Roman history, it was all fabricated by monks of the church or whatever they claim were the ones that forged the documents, and maybe not the whole thing, but some of it. It's the question that I brought up to you, where it's like, then who wrote everything that we know of as far as Pythagoras, Plato, Platonism, maybe not Neoplatonism, but you know what I'm saying? Like, who built those cosmologies? Because those cosmologies are even Gnosticism. I mean, all that falls into this time era where it's like they couldn't have falsified all of it. There's no way. Is there? Like, you know what I'm saying?
I think that it's not necessarily a falsification. So Fomenko's argument with that is that he says that we don't have any text that can predate the 11th century, maybe the 10th century, if you're being liberal. So the problem is, from his point of view, is that when you think of people like Plato or any of these sources that are from like the BC 80 line, a little bit before and up to like the year 1000, what he's saying is, and he shows in his books, is that the copies that we have available to us were only discovered in the 16th century a lot of the times, or after. So when you think of someone like Plato, the only copy we have available of it is from like the 16th century in his argument.
Yeah.
And the fragments that, like, another thing he brings up is that a lot of times when like people will be looking into something and they'll be looking for the original source, so they'll claim like they're going to rewrite to the best of their ability, and then miraculously they'll suddenly discover the original copy that's allegedly from, let's say, 5 AD. But then as soon as they get done making the copy of that that 5 AD manuscript, suddenly the manuscript goes missing and is never seen again. So you just have to rely on these people's word that they actually had the original, because we don't have access to it. That's a huge problem. We don't have access to any of these documents. The documents we do have available, a lot of them are from, Byzantium, stuff like that. So it's one of these things where he's just trying to figure out, from my understanding, he's literally just trying to figure out what exactly happened and why. And another misconception about this is that people say that he's talking about, this whole Tartarian empire and all this stuff as if it's a good thing. My understanding from his perception on this is that Tartaria was not necessarily a good thing or like some utopian empire. Like he's describing it similar. I think he misses the points on some of the stuff, because he wasn't planning to do this research. He's a mathematician, so I think he's kind of missing some of the bigger picture stuff. But he's saying like the people who were actually the Tartarians were something similar to God's chosen people. He says that they felt like they had the right to rule over other people, so they used, like, for example, the Mongolian horde to enforce this by conquering other people and forcing them to be a part of this. So to me, that doesn't sound like a utopia. That's the idea that it's some sort of like millennial reign of Christ or something. I mean, I don't even know. I just can't understand where it comes from.
Yeah. So what's your honest opinion on, because Fomenko's research is something that is brought up constantly when it comes to the Tartarian movement. I know your Tartarian truth. What is your truth about Tartaria, and how has the narrative changed throughout time?
I have multiple feelings about it. I'm not set in stone on anything with it, but to me, it does seem likely that Tartaria was, pretty much just what we're describing now. It's like the same type of society that we have now, where you're pretty much under pressure by a force who owns and controls everything and forces you to pay taxes, and forces you to contribute to the system. The only reason it's being covered up is because they're trying to like make a separation between something that never actually fell. It's kind of like the concept with World War II, like how after World War II, a lot of the people who were the bad guys allegedly went over to Russia and the United States and became the leaders in those governments, right? So it's like, it's a similar concept involving Tartaria, but for whatever reason, it's just pushed off as it's like, I feel like the narrative that's pushed on YouTube actually helps cover up the reality of what it was, which is seemingly just the same society we have today, but just performed slightly differently.
Because the one video that really unraveled Tartaria for me, and you kind of cleared it up for me when we talked. I said, I forget the name of the channels, AOR, I think, and he showed the plaster buildings. So the buildings look like stone on the outside. These mansions look like marble on the inside, but then they would open these doors, and the marble was fake. It was all essentially plywood, and it was just painted to look like marble. So it wasn't actual marble or whatever it was, you know what I'm saying? But that really did it for me, because I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Then these buildings probably weren't as majestic as people were like, oh, look at all this architecture. Look at the World Fair, and they tore it all down. But then you're like, yeah, if you look at the building codes of that time, this was regular stuff to use this material.
It's still used today, in plaster of Paris. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why that could be. I mean, for one example, the idea of not being able to use hewn stones, so using the plaster as a mold over buildings is a workaround for that. So if we're entertaining the idea that a group of people actually does control the world, no, there's no specific label that should be put on this group, because they seem to be a part of every religion and like even atheists, like the education system, everything. Like these same themes pop up in all of these aspects of life. So to put the blame on one group, to me, is silly, but people can think whatever they want. But you find these same concepts in every religion. So the idea that they can't use hewn stones, they came up with this workaround using plaster to do this with these buildings. Now you have a debate among these people whether to practice their beliefs openly so everyone knows what's going on, or if it should be initiates only. So some of the reasons why these old buildings were so monumental and had all these artistic representations of Greco-Roman mythology and other concepts like that could be just different ways of running society, trying different ideas for, what's the best way to control people. You have to think about it, because like how many people would actually, I know that the narrative says 1 million people came over to the World's Fair or whatever, but how many people are actually going to know what this stuff means or why it's there, right? Like who's going to look at the statue of the Republic at the World's Fair and think about, the dove on top of the staff? Oh, that means that that's related to Semiramis or Inanna or the Queen of Heaven. And
what was the name of the statue? Statue of what?
The Statue of the Republic. Just that giant. It's like a giant statue is in the middle of the water. Now, some people say it's a dove, but it also kind of looks like a cuckoo bird, which ties into because a cuckoo bird is an animal that lays eggs in other birds' nests and has them raise their young. So think about, the whole concept of the World's Fair. People talk about the orphan trains and all that stuff. So that's actually the newer version. The original version was a little bit different, but
this one?
Yeah, so you see, so the average people just going to the fair, they're not going to be thinking much about this. However, it is possible that the people who are going to the fair did completely understand this, because so much happened after this, right? We have multiple world wars where all these people were exterminated.
Is this a Phrygian cap?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a Phrygian cap. I don't know how much you want to get into like the cause of this stuff or who these people might be, or if you want to kind of push forward for a minute and then loop back around for it.
So let's stop real quick, because you hit on some interesting points. You said they couldn't use certain stone. Are we talking about the Jews, or what are we talking about? That they can't build a certain stone?
So yes, you could say the Jews, but it is, once again, it's not the Jews who are responsible for this. Let's make that very clear. But yes, if you use Jewish texts like the Talmud or stuff like that, and just look at the laws that they have, which translate once again to like every single religion, yes, they're not allowed to build certain ways. So all of these, when you look into history, you can find these identifications if you actually read these laws and figure out what's pretty much going on. So you can see how on this one, it looks like the Phrygian cap has been removed in the newer edition.
Yeah.
And now it looks more like an eagle or something on the ball.
Like a phoenix. Yeah, it looks like a phoenix. That's interesting. So they always seem to find a workaround for things, almost as if, and the one that really makes me laugh, I forget which religion it is or which cult it is. I don't know. But there's one where they can't operate heavy machinery, so they have like this weird contraption on the back of the forklift with like some super long extensions on the handles, and the dude is operating the forklift, except he's not sitting in it. And it's almost like, if your God is all powerful and omnipotent and this crazy infinite being, you don't think that he'd know that you're doing a workaround on purpose?
Well, that's the thing. So when you think about why that would be, right? It's because they don't believe in God. They're like the people who are making those rules for the people in the religion, they're basically atheist, or they think basically the lie from the Garden of Eden, through knowledge you could become like God. So they see themselves as equal to God, or they just don't believe in God at all. But they're high up in the religions that they infiltrate, and then they change the rules over time to every religion. I mean, you literally see this in every single religion, that even the new ones like Baha'ism and all this stuff, it starts out a certain way, and then human beings come in and they interpret it and they make all these rules for people, and then over like hundreds of years it changes to like a completely different thing. So this happened with Judaism as well. Like, it started out a certain way and now it's completely different, but there's sects inside of it who argue and debate about stuff. But
yeah. And what is all this back here? Are these different gods and goddesses, or what's going on? What is all this back here?
See, this is where it gets a little bit confusing, because in the photos of this, it talks, like in the photos, you can see that it's just the same few statues repeated over and over again. But there's a book that goes along with this World Fair where they describe the statues in detail.
It's
and
the same
it seems
one?
I mean, there's like I think there's like 5 or 6 different ones that they repeat in that picture. But when you read the book, it literally gives the detail of every single statue in there, and it, like, tells what it's made out of and stuff like that. And every exhibit, it just goes through and describes it. So it seems like, for whatever reason, these photos don't line up with what's described in the book. Excuse me.
Is this the original eagle that was so painted? The pedestals? No, it's not the one. So, do you believe the narrative that's been painted with this?
What are you asking? What I think about the World's Fair?
No, so because Tartaria, to me, in my opinion, is almost like, again, like another rendition of Atlantis. That people say that these buildings were already here, and their evidence is that there's no pictures, that the pictures that they have these white skies, right? This is like early Photoshop. There's a lot of pictures of city streets that are empty. There's only pictures with scaffolding because they were repairing these buildings. And again, it's just another rendition of Atlantis, lost civilization that was wiped out by a cataclysm or whatever it is. And then the next people come in and they take over and they start using the technology. And that's why they destroyed it, because now they don't want us to know our true history. All this red brick was taken away because it held the charge, and this was free energy, and this and that.
Can you go back to that other picture real quick? The one with tons of people, 2 more from here.
This one?
Yeah.
Is this all repeated?
What you're saying does make sense to a certain extent, because you have to think about the context of history, what was taking place in the 1800s up until it's still taking place today, just with different people. So to me, okay, I mean, we'll just have to go straight conspiracy, but to me, what seems to be taking place is sort of along the lines of a pyramid scheme. So there seems to be a group of people who do have control over society for whatever reason. Whether that's a good thing or bad thing is up for debate. But basically, they make promises to people like, hey, if you come to this place, this will be the life that you have. Once people get in there and enough people cash in, the people in control have to figure out a way, okay, too many people are cashing in, so we have to do something. So they create some sort of war or cataclysm or catastrophe or some reason why these people lose everything. And then they either move them to a new location, or they have a new group of people come in and take over the previous jobs or buildings or houses, right? So, I mean, you see this in America all the time. People in like the 70s and 80s, they bought houses they expected to live in for the rest of their lives and to pass it down to their family. What happens? We have market crashes, we have all this stuff, it kicks people out, and then new people move in. Specifically in the late 1800s, we have mass migrations from Germany of a specific type of people. So, I mean, these World's Fairs very well could have been just them saying, hey, come over to America.
Propaganda.
Yeah, it's like basically like propaganda, like this is the life that you'll have. So everyone's all excited. They agree to the terms and conditions. We're going to pay taxes. We're going to work these long hours, blah, blah, blah. We're going to have this life. Once enough people start cashing in, guess what? World War I. Goodbye. Like, everything changes, right? Next people can be imported over, new immigration. These people fall for the same trick. The people who just fell for the trick are either dead or they're not getting listened to because they're now seen as crazy or poor. And these new people are the new victims. And then they just go back and forth because, you see what I'm saying? It's like a giant pyramid scheme over and over again.
So they're not a homunculus then, Shem?
It's possible. I mean, I do entertain all the ideas because you have to think, I mean, if there is a group in control of us, right? I mean, do they have the power to actually create us? Because you do have these texts talking about that type of stuff. So it's like, you have to think about it. I mean, it may not necessarily be real. But...
So them, are they human? Are they otherworldly? Are they interdimensional? What are your thoughts on they I guess them, this cabal at the center of it all that has been orchestrating and doing these, making these world events and these revolutions like the Illuminati or assassinations of certain political figures, all these, what are they? Are they human or are they something? Do they survive? Is there 12 of them? Is there 7 of them? Like,
those are interesting ideas. I'm honestly not sure at all who they would be, but when I'm open to the idea that they could be something other than human just because of the, the elongated skulls and other stuff that you find in some of these royal burials. And so, I mean, it's impossible to tell, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they are human. It seems like they genuinely believe that they just have the right to rule over other people. And like I said, it may not be necessarily a bad thing. It could be something good. Like maybe they just, maybe they understand human nature so much, because I've talked to multiple people about this. One of the first things I ask them is, do you think humans are naturally good or bad? Like, without the structure that we have, thanks to these people, would the world be better or worse? Right. So I don't really know who they are exactly, but what I can tell you is that no matter what religious text you read, no matter what scientific study you study, you're going to find these same themes in them, like order from chaos. Basically is like the easiest way to put it, like the transition between order and chaos, and that concept.
Yeah, because this is another one here. All these fires. It seems that there are a lot of fires throughout history, like the Great Fire of Jacksonville, the Great Fire of XYZ, and it's usually around this time. Maybe perhaps they don't build like this anymore because there wasn't fire codes, or there wasn't regulations or anything going on, and that's why they were easily susceptible to fires. Or how the conspiracy says, no, it was done on purpose. It was done by this group of people who want to manipulate perception and manipulate reality, and they're the true mimetic magicians. So what you've said so far is that these world fairs could have been a ploy to recruit people to come on over, because the world fairs were everywhere during the early 20th century, right? There was a lot of different world fairs. There was one in Florida, there was one France, Colombia, like all these different places. Like there was a World's Fair. And Walter Bosley has his book, the Latitude 33. He talked about how at Disneyland it was an endless World Fair, because Walt Disney would take all the decommissioned machines and equipment, and a lot of the stuff that was at Disneyland was from these world fairs, from these expositions. So if you think of Disneyland, it was an endless world fair because he kept all the stuff there. Did he know about the technology? Like, did he have some understanding of, hey, like this technology serves some extra purpose, Well,
what would you say the difference in technology is, if you had to say there was one?
There is. So as far as technology, and this is a word that's really tricky, because when you think of technology, you automatically think of like hardware and computers and screens and this and that. And the way and this is something I battled with for a long time. And mind you, one of my first interviews is actually one of your favorite people, Brian Forster. I think it was episode 6. He was one of the first people I ever interviewed. He was probably like the 5th or 6th person I had ever interviewed when I first started my show. And his whole thing is about ancient technology, right? Of like, what were these people doing or using? And in my opinion, I think the technology differs as far as it's more analog, so less. It's more grounded. I don't know how to explain it. It's like it's more grounded in the sense of it feels like the technology that we have now today, this is going to be weird to say, but like lacks soul in some sort of way. Like it feels hollow. Now,
I think you're onto something.
So check this out. This is I'm finding it's hard for me to explain this, because if you feel something, they always say, oh, they don't make them like they used to anymore. Right? When you shut an antique car's door, it sounds solid. It's like grounded. It's like tough. It's there. And then the stuff today, it feels hollow. They're not using the same metal. They're not using the same wood anymore. A lot of these older trees that were hundreds and thousands of years old that they were making the wood out of, that have been wiped out. Imagine what those trees and the information, I'm getting a little bit woo-woo, but imagine the information and the things that those trees saw that transfers over in some sort of way in a sympathetic, magical way to the buildings themselves. You get what I'm like?
No, I understand.
It's like
I
a
mean,
soul aspect. And I don't want to sound too woo because that kind of throws technology out of the door. Like, wait, what are you talking about? But in my opinion, bro, I think that the original intention of technology to begin with was to bring you closer to the Godhead, if not emulate the Godhead or God or whatever you want to call it.
it's an interesting concept, but it also that concept ties into like kind of what this alleged group would want, though, because their whole thing is that they think that they can become like God. It's like the original lie that Lucifer told to the angels to get some of them to fall with him, and also the lie in the Garden of Eden to Adam and Eve. But yeah, I mean, think about what you're saying. You're saying that the products are cheaper and they're designed basically almost to fail at a certain point. So this is where the idea of this group, if they are in control, comes into play even more. It's because they're like basically designing these things it's based on the economy, and the idea that they went around and like got rid of all these animals, pushed them to extinction, and pushed these trees to extinction shows that maybe they aren't as responsible as we would like them to be if they are in control, right? Because it seems like they just can't get enough of things to where they push them to extinction. One good example is like when, New France, when they came over to settle with all these merchants and stuff, there were great auks, which are like a penguin type bird that lived in North America and completely hunted to extinction. We have these giant beavers. Buffalo is another great example of this.
Giant beavers, you said?
Yeah, in Canada, I think they were like 3 or 4 feet tall, if I'm remembering correctly. But
look at this.
See the bison. See that's allegedly for a different reason, though. That's to control against people who are rebelling. So this kind of ties back into the whole Fomenko thing. But one last thing I want to talk about with the with the World's Fairs, to give more context for what we were saying and maybe some more evidence, is that World's Fairs are actually much older than we know. Like they originated in allegedly the Middle Ages as trade fairs, which are places where merchants would go and they would all meet up together and they would say, is this going to work for a spot to establish a trading post or a city? Which is literally what Chicago became, one of the major trading cities in the United States. It's the same concept. So they would all meet up, they would build these buildings, they would do all this stuff. If it worked out, a new city would pop up. If it didn't work out, then maybe 1 or 2 guys would stay behind and still have trade with the people around there, and they would build these star forts, which just so happened to fit into the exact criteria of something called a roof within this oral law, if you want to call it, so what you're looking at here. So the benefits of this, so this wall here, this group for some reason doesn't go outside on Saturdays.
Finish your line of thought, Shem, because you said that it aligns with what? With what way of thinking?
The basically the interpreters that are in every religion that interpret the original thing and change it to fit this criteria, a certain criteria that seems to be related to the mystery religion or the lie of Lucifer in the Garden of Eden. It's like the simplest way I can put it, just this concept that men are God, and then they have these certain practices that revolve around that.
Mm-hmm.
One of them being the eternal flame. So the eternal flame seems to be very big in all of these religions. You see it everywhere. So these star forts, the merchants who are running these star forts are almost always a part of this cult or secret society. Building these forts in this way, you see all the buildings in there, right? So because of the specific height of these walls and the way that it's designed, there's a concept called eruv, E-R-U-V, within their laws, which allows them to travel on Saturdays, the Sabbath, the most important day, outside of their house. So you can see these all around your city. So these poles right here you're looking at, this is the modern way of building a star fort. This is a star fort because now we can't see the wall, so we're unaware of what's going on. So they put up these wires instead. If this was 1200 or something, then this area would be a star fort.
Wait, so what's the workaround with this line? So they put this line in what? They can then go outside?
Yeah, because you're not allowed to carry things from inside of your house to outside of your house on Saturdays, because according to them, the Sabbath is the most important day. And the most important, they claim that the Sabbath represents the only child of God, which happens to be a female, which is really strange. and for some reason you're not supposed to carry things from inside your house to outside your house on Saturdays. So I
What?
mean,
They
I know
have.
it's like, this is like Manhattan is another example of a city that's massive like this, and where I live, Columbus, we have these as well. They're the entire neighborhood. So basically, it allows them to do things that it's like creating a private domain for a certain group of people. And
Wow.
these stock these so if you think about the idea of who these people are, a lot of times they're the merchants and they're everything else. So the smaller examples are probably are just like smaller trading posts, or before they expanded them to larger areas, right?
Yeah. No, I'm with you on what you're saying, and I never saw it from that point of view.
Well, a good way to find out about this is like looking into the history of early America and the merchants who came over here. What they would do, they would go to a new area. And man, there's been like ambulances going for the last 15 minutes here. I'm sorry, but
Very good. I can't
uh,
hear him.
good. But so they would show up in these new locations, kind of like what we were talking about with the World's Fairs. They would show up and they would try to establish trade with the natives of that area. Interestingly enough, they could already understand these natives, and a lot of historians have documented the similarities between them and the old world people with their practices, their religion, everything about them. So these people a lot of times would just show up, build these forts, and then establish trade and try to actually integrate into the tribes and become the chief themselves. If that didn't work, then they had their star fort to help protect them. They would show up with their company, which the old meaning of company was basically like a military force, although it's changed multiple times throughout history. And they would just, slowly have the star fort. It would expand over time. I mean, look at the cities in Canada. And it allowed them to basically just live freely within these boundaries and not have to worry about extra rules, because, I mean, there's more that comes along with the Aruv than just, simply carrying stuff in and out of your house. It's not the only thing that changes as a result of this. So, but I feel like I feel like
That's
kind of
wild,
just right.
bro. I never made this connection, but it seems like, and this is something I think I tried to bring up on the phone with you, but I couldn't remember it because I was listening to it. And this concept of integrating themselves with the people, right? Of taking over positions of power. Again, that aligns up with the entire Illuminati narrative. You also have the idea of so when they took out the Illuminati, the Jesuits took over, and like all that whole concept, like there was different factions and sects at play here and there. And one of the things that stood out to me with this Sabbatian Zevi guy was that the followers of this religion that he had made, which was essentially, I think, I want to say redemption through sin sort of thing, where it didn't matter how much bad you did, it was okay because you were going to be redeemed either way. One of the things that they did in this religion was that they could outwardly practice a religion, Catholicism, Christianity, whatever else, but in private, they were Sabbatian, right? They were whatever this cult was. And this is essentially one of the most famous, I guess, Jews or whatever, right? He started the whole Sabbatian movement. It was one of the most famous Jews. And so these Sabbatians were a variety of Jewish followers, disciples, and believers in Sabbatian Zevi, a Sephardic Jewish rabbi and Kabbalist who was proclaimed to be the Jewish Messiah in 1666. Right, very important because he got the 666. Also, he had picked some other date too that had 3-6 in it. And let's see here. Let's look at what their beliefs. So, do you know anything about this guy at all? You're muted, bro.
Sorry about that. So my understanding of the situation is Nathan of Gaza, the guy who proclaimed for him to be the Messiah, does seem to be more of like the guy pulling the strings in a lot of this. I think that this is another example of something that was hijacked and basically changed after the fact to present a certain narrative.
And I was
But
thinking of Frankism too, by the way, but Frankism was a Sabbatian Jewish religious movement. And this is the one where Frank rejected religious norms and said that his followers were obliged to transgress as many moral boundaries as possible. At a time, it claimed perhaps 50,000 followers, primarily Jews living in Poland, as well as in Central and Eastern Europe. This is the one that I was thinking about. But Frankism is associated with the Sabbatians of Turkey, a religious movement that identified the 17th century Jewish rabbi Zabbatai Zevi as the Messiah. Like Frankism, the earlier forms of Sabbatianism believed that, at least in some circumstances, antinomianism was the correct path. So
this is... Sorry, go ahead.
And this is any view which rejects laws or legalism and argues against moral, religious, or social norms, or at least considered to do so. The term has both religious and secular meaning. So kind of sort of the same thing of rejecting, redemption through sin. And Zevi himself would perform actions that violated traditional Jewish taboos, such as eating foods that were forbidden by Kashrut, the Jewish dietary laws, and celebrating prescribed fast days as feast days, et cetera, et cetera. Go ahead.
So we have to think about both of these people in the context of what was taking place historically during their lives. So you have a group of people who are self-proclaimed leaders of the Jewish community. So the rabbi, basically the interpreters, who came up with all of these rules based on their interpretation of what the Old Testament, basically the Tanakh, the book of the prophets in the writings, their interpretation of what that means. So these people, Sabbatian Zevi and Jacob Frank, are basically rebelling against this oppression placed on them by a group of people, because if you didn't follow exactly their laws, then you were basically excommunicated from the community and you lived a terrible life. A great example of this is Spinoza, Spinoza and Uriel, what's the other guy's name? Sorry, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but there's basically these two Jewish scholars who did something similar to this. And honestly, today a lot of Judaism is based around, like secular Judaism is based around their beliefs, because they were humiliated for going against the social norms at the time. So what were these rabbi doing during the time period of Sabbatian Zevi and Jacob Frank? They were forcing people to live in like these ghetto areas, which is like the same concept we saw in World War II, to live in these walled cities so that they could have, all the benefits of what we talked about earlier.
Is that why?
And they would basically you can't do this, you can't do that, you have to do this, you have to brush your teeth this way, you have to talk to people this way. So a lot of times when you hear about emancipation, it's literally like emancipation of the Jews. They're getting emancipated from their own leadership, the Sanhedrin, or the Zugot, which is the Abedin, and the Nasi. The Nasi is would be basically like a prime minister or a president, and the Abedin is like a chief justice, of a Supreme Court for something. So yeah, I mean, these people were basically trying to emancipate themselves in a certain way. Now, how much of what they were doing was actually true, and how much of it, I don't know. It could have been hijacked after the fact, is what I'm saying. A lot of these stories could have been made up, but it could be 100% true, and it could just be kind of what we were talking about earlier, how it's potential that there's a debate amongst these people of what to practice publicly and what to practice privately.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying?
I
mean, I'm open to both of them, but I just like to think about it in many ways as possible.
That's interesting, because one of the things that I think I saw it on Reddit or something like that, was why didn't during World War II, why wasn't there a golem present protecting the Jews? And somebody commented because the true Kabbalists and the pure rabbis are no longer around. It's all been tainted and perverted, and that's why they're not able to create golems again, because the purpose of a golem was to protect the Jewish people as well, right? From being prosecuted, persecuted, whatever. Like, and in Prague, it was in one of the ghettos, allegedly, that was like one of the more famous legends of the golem. And I'm reading here, and it says here, according to Michelson, Frank's theology asserted that the attempt to liberate the sparks of holiness was the problem, not the solution. So right here, so in traditional Sabbatian doctrine, Zevi and often his followers claim to be able to liberate the sparks of holiness hidden within what seemed to be evil. According to Michelson, Frank's theology asserted that the attempt to liberate the sparks of holiness was the problem, not the solution. Rather, Frank claimed that the mixing between holy and unholy was virtuous. And so this other guy, Nathanael Letterberg, claims that Frank had a Gnostic philosophy wherein there was a true God whose existence was hidden by a false God. This true God could allegedly be revealed only through a total destruction of the social and religious structures created by the false God, thus leading to a thorough antinomianism. Antinomianism, yeah, I'm saying it right, hopefully. For Frank, the very distinction between good and evil is a product of a world governed by the false God. Letterberg compares Frank's position to that of Friedrich Nietzsche. Wow, that's really,
Yeah, I mean,
that's really interesting.
This stuff, yeah, I mean, this stuff goes extremely deep because it just gets into once again, the debate amongst themselves about what is the actual true God.
Yeah. It's like Yahweh,
for example,
isn't the real God, but then they take it and they adopted it. Didn't you post something about that today?
I don't think so, but they have like a concept where basically the creator God is not the God of this world, which is kind of what he's describing here. So they call it alum or something like that. But basically, like, the God who's active in society and active in our world is not the actual true God. Basically, what you're saying. So these people who make these interpretations and have these oral law are doing their best to try to become God themselves in any way possible. So everything they do is revolved around getting closer to that step of being like God, even though that goes directly against some interpretations of what the religion's supposed to be, right? You're not supposed to make images of God. You're not supposed to do all this stuff, but the opposite is taking place, right?
That's an interesting point that you touch on, because I talked about this, I forgot with who, where they were like, oh, it's bad to want to be God. It's bad to want to be godlike. And I go, not in all religions. Some religions strive to be like God. Literally, the imitation of God is what they strive for. Not to become God, but to imitate. But again, where do you draw the line? It's almost like trying to find a loophole. And it's like, well, I can become like God. I'm not technically overthrowing him, but he's not going to know the difference, right? If I just put this little wire up here and then bada bing, bada boom, I'm good to go. It's okay for me to have sex with this golem because God didn't create it. I did. So it's a loophole. It's like, wait, what? What are you getting at, bro? You know? So no, but that's an interesting connection. And back again to this concept of these people, and by these people,
you can call them basically just like the interpreters, because they seem to just, their main thing is interpreting things and making laws out of it.
We're not talking about specifically about Jews. If anything, right, the ones, because in my opinion, dude, I don't even think that whatever is in control is human. Like, and by whatever is in control, I'm talking about like the forces of evil. I think whatever is driving people to do what they do, and this is real. This is talked about even in scholarly circles. You know, we did an episode a long time ago on crowd psychology, and this was a book written in towards the end of the 19th century, where he talked about crowd psychology. Let me find his name so people can look it up. So crowd psychology. Gustav Le Bon, I always forget it. And Gustav Le Bon, which is the father of crowd psychology, which a crowd is a nation, a crowd is a people, a crowd could be a small congregation of people, right? And we're talking about what we're talking about, small groups and pockets of people. That's a crowd, okay? A nation can be a crowd. There's certain criteria that you need to fall under to be a crowd. And one of the interesting parts about it all, this is a guy who was a scholar who is looking at things from a psychological perspective. There was one thing that he couldn't account for, and it's what he called the contagion that would weave itself in and out of the crowd and take over the crowd and possess the crowd. Therefore, the crowd becomes its own living organism, its own entity, and the crowd is only as smart as the dumbest person in it. So there is a metaphysical or perhaps occult aspect to what is controlling people. Why do people act a certain type of way when they're in crowds? Well, it's because of this contagion. What's the contagion? We don't know what that is. It's a force that takes people over when they're in certain settings and they do things that they wouldn't otherwise do if they were by themselves.
And this actually ties back to what we were talking about earlier, is this group seems to be like controlling people, right? So what you're describing now, that may be the reason why they seem like they're required to have these population shifts or resets or calls
To
like
rewash people, yeah.
Exactly, because there's no way, like they're trying to figure out the best way to actually control their livestock, which theoretically we would be their livestock. So if we think about everything that we've been talking about so far from a secular view, okay, so this is not reflecting my own beliefs about reality, but if we're going to look at it from a secular point real quick, so God in that point of view would literally just be the people who are in control. So rebelling against God in all these texts, that's literally just us or people who are getting too much information, or the contagion rebelling against the order that was already there. And so I don't know, pretty much it. I don't remember where I was going with it exactly, but sorry.
The game that I was streaming today, Baldur's Gate, it's literally the Mind Flayer puts this Illuminati worm, what we call it an Illuminati worm, in your eye, and then it goes into your brain and it takes over your entire system, and then you're able to control other people's minds because you have that contagion within you, and you're able to project your thoughts onto other people, other creatures or other people, because you have this mind. But the thing is, if you don't get it out, then you turn into a Mind Flayer, which is like this Cthulhu looking entity. So it's like, what are you willing to do to get it out? And the whole point of the game is you're trying to figure out how to take this, what they call it, a tadpole, out of your body, so that you don't turn into a Mind Flayer. So again, it's almost like the movie Alien, and you always think about what are they trying to tell us with these movies. And I'm a big Alien fan. H.R. Geiger, he's a weird dude. The guy who designed the xenomorph, like that, he's a weird guy. He was having like, it's almost like another H.P. Lovecraft, where he's having these weird things come to him in his dreams, and he's having these grotesque visions that he's painting, and it just looks really like cyberpunk / whatever. Like I don't know. It's just pretty demonic too, in a sort of way, like real evil looking. But they're coming out with another Alien movie coming up. It's called Alien Romulus, and it comes out 8/16/24. And it's like, it's the 7th movie in the Alien franchise, I guess. And it's like, what are they trying to tell us? And it seems like it's the same movie over and over again, just with different people. So it's almost like how you're saying, this is like a movie. This is like a movie where the cast is recasted every single movie, and every single movie is its own reality. Essentially is what it is, right? Its own capsule, its own star form, if you will, but with
the same theme, but with different characters. Yeah, I think it just once again ties back. The simplest way to imagine all of this is with the Garden of Eden, like just the allegory of becoming the flame or whatever you're describing earlier. It's like once we consume that knowledge, there was no going back. we left paradise forever, because it's like, you can think about this even in the sense of Greek mythology. So before Cronus, which would to me symbolize taking the bite of the apple, Uranus was basically like the time of paradise. No one was aware of anything. Cronus comes along. That's when time starts. That's when we become aware of time. There's no going back from. There's literally no going back. Now that we know that time exists, that's what knowing about death is. Now that before this, we didn't know about time. We didn't know that you could die. We didn't know that this could be the only time we could have a conversation. Like, we would just think, okay, we're gonna talk tomorrow. We're gonna talk for the rest of the time. You see what I'm saying? Like, so when we committed that original sin of finding out what was going on, there was that was planted inside of our DNA, planted with us forever. So no matter what, we're always going to have that contagion in the crowd who's rebelling against the order, because they're aware. We have this awareness of something we were never supposed to know. We were never supposed to do that. We were supposed to just be, let's talk about it secularly, we were supposed to just be loyal to our God or our king. Some sort of rebellion happened in a secular world where people became aware of what was going on, right? And now they, if there is a controller, they're just testing out the best way of controlling their livestock, which is us, by potentially, okay, so this is way off topic, sorry, but potentially just creating these different religions around the world. And until recently, we weren't able to actually communicate to find out the similarities between all of them. So theoretically, the reason why we would have this, like, okay, why in Japan is there an eternal flame with a high priestess that can only go into the temple, only one person can, and keep this flame lit? Why is that same concept in Zoroastrianism? Why is it in China? Why is it in Native Americans? Why is it with Judaism? Like, when they rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, what's going to happen inside the temple is there's going to be an eternal flame. So why is this concept all around the world? Could be multiple reasons why, but one reason was what I was just describing. It's literally just a way of them, like, being lazy, copy and paste the same religion, but change slight things about it. Which way works the best for controlling people? Oh, these people aren't working out. Let's have these other ones go invade their country and kill all of them and start over. I mean, that's just one way of looking at it. I'm not necessarily saying I believe that. I'm just saying something I've thought about. So as far as the Jewish people go, because we were talking about them earlier and how it seems like they're the current, like, bad guys. I genuinely believe that this whole Jewish thing only started within the last 150 years or so. Like, they literally laid the groundwork to use this people currently, and they're either going to move on to a different people in the near future, just like they have in the past. Like you were saying earlier, the Illuminati, the Jesuits, at different times in history, they've used, like, certain groups as their main base, and right now, currently, it just happens to be Jewish people. But what's taking place with Jewish people right now? The same kind of concept we were talking about earlier. Hey, everyone, move to Israel. Come on down. Come on, it's going to be perfect here. So either A, they're going to have, if they really are the bad guys, which I don't think they are, they're going to have all of their friends move to Israel and then destroy the rest of the world. Or B,
and their huge star fort.
Or B, or the other option is, hey, all of you Jewish people move to Israel. It's going to be paradise. However, the people telling them to move to Israel don't live there. So it's like the perfect way of getting rid of all of them, literally, by exterminating Israel. And now they don't have to fulfill any of their commitments to these people anymore. They could start over again. Obviously, both of those theories are insane and very conspiratorial, but I mean, it's just the kind of stuff that I like to think about.
Existence is conspiratorial, bro. And
well, they do have a.
Go ahead.
I was going to say they do have in the Zohar, it talks about it's like some prophecy. I don't remember the exact thing off the top of my head, but it's talking about if they go up against the children of light, they'll, like, dry up all the waters and something else. It sounded basically like a nuclear bomb, and from my perspective, like, it sounded like it was something that they would intentionally destroy people who rebel against the children of light, is what they call them in the Zohar. So when I think about that, I also think about the concept you were talking about earlier of moving people around. Think about places like Salt Lake City, Utah, and all these places that are like, you see the ruins of some sort of civilization there. I don't know if you've ever seen the video, I think it's Gary Shunung or whatever, goes around the world and shows different weird things on Google Maps, but he, like, goes everywhere on the entire planet. But anyways, if you look at that video,
channels like that.
no, it's actually, like, it's like a really old documentary. It's from, like, 2009 or 2010 or something. So, but it's just no commentary, and you just literally has all these places bookmarked. But anyways, within this, you see, like, ruins of civilization that are never talked about in any books anywhere. It's just like especially out in like the desert areas of the United States. So, when I think about that prophecy in the Zohar, and I think about the idea of documented history of moving populations around and stuff like that, it's like, are they on some sort of cycle? Are they intentionally doing this in a certain time frame, which seems to be the case based on their own text and based on astrology, even like they have these like ways of coordinating society based on certain time frames. And it's hard for me to explain it because I'm not that knowledgeable, and I'm also just a janitor, so I can not like a scholar or anything. But
That doesn't mean anything, bro.
it does seem like they're on some sort of time frame. I've heard other people speculate that like this time frame using the stars is basically their way of knowing when a cataclysm happens. But I think that since they are such a cult-like, ritual-like society, it's possible that they just automatically do these things based on these stars as opposed to it
Or
being
it's in
some
their
sort of
DNA,
natural.
bro. If they are the
Could be.
children of the light, or we are all stars, what if that's inherently in their DNA already and they can sense it? Maybe their balls tingle a little bit and they go, we gotta end the world right now, or in 6 months, or whatever, or 666 days, because you know what I'm saying, like all these different concepts of listen. And I thought that the Jew stuff was pretty overplayed. I do think that there is maybe perhaps they are scapegoats, but a lot of the times they do fall into the stereotype. Certain peoples fall into certain stereotypes that they've been given over and over and over again. Again, almost like if it's in their genetics or in their DNA or whatever it is that they need to be a certain type of way. And this, now I'm not just saying for Jews, this accounts for all races and all Puerto Ricans are lazy. That's the stereotype, but it's true. We are all lazy. That's just the truth of it. But how you're saying where they need to reset it, but what about, do they have enough people within themselves to sustain themselves if they do wipe out everybody else? Because one of the things is, can the king operate if he doesn't have his peasants? Because that's what I never really understood about. And we know what happened in 2020, and we know we know the whole narrative of they want to wipe everybody out. Well, if they wipe everybody out, how are they gonna? They're not gonna be out in their fields, mining their fields and picking their crops and tending to their horses and cleaning out the cow out of their stalls and doing all. They're not gonna do the dirty work.
No, I agree. I think that they do everything possible to not have to get to that point. Like literally, when I say everything possible, I mean like it's like a absolute last resort if it ever were to happen, which is why like we have that promise kind of in the Bible about never having the flood again from after Noah, right? It's like,
Well,
okay,
now it's
we
gonna be
never
with fire, no?
could be. I mean, based on the Zohar that we were talking about a minute ago too, it does seem like it, but I think that that's an absolute last ditch effort for them. I think that they do everything possible to try to avoid doing that if they even have the power to do that to begin with. That would be my thought on it, because we seem to be livestock to them and they don't want to have to recreate us. And that's where the whole idea of like the homunculus and like the orphans and these baby incubators come into play too. It's like, so is that actually what they do if this were to happen? Are they able to actually create people? Because there are some weird texts that describe alchemical processes that sound like either the creation of a soul or like a planet or some sort of
Maybe that's both the same
being.
thing, bro.
It could be, because I mean, I heard, like I don't know if you've ever seen Futurama, but there's like these lightning beings on there, like balls of lightning or something. But it's weird because for some reason, when it comes to like physics and or I don't even know what the proper scientific term is, but they basically say that those balls of lightning actually are souls, or they're like intelligent beings. Like it's like mainstream science. So it's weird that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I did see that the ball lightning phenomenon is conscious in some sort of way. It shows signs of consciousness, and it all goes back to the manipulation of plasma. And you have people who talk about plasma entities, and that's what are angels, and that's what are demons, or the ether or aether, however you want to say it, where like there's this. invisible force that is there that is able to be manipulated or acts on its own. One of the theories that I really enjoy is the electric universe theory. That's like one of my favorite that I don't think really gets that much love, right?
I don't even know if I've heard of it.
You don't heard of the electric universe theory?
I might have, but I don't remember.
That all the phenomenon and everything that we know has all been like giant cataclysm. That the planets were once closer together at one point, and you know the scar that we see on Mars was from a cataclysmic arching of lightning between the two heavenly bodies, and that when that was happening, the shapes that it would form in the sky were interpreted as all these symbols that we see in all these ancient religions. I'm gonna have to send you the videos, but it's super interesting, super fascinating, because it gets into like the ether and the plasma is all electrical, and like it makes sense because if we take the concept of Frankenstein, or you mentioned the homunculus, you mentioned it, not me. The homunculus, yeah. The homunculus, if you look at Frankenstein, well, Frankenstein is what? Animated through what? Through electricity. They're able to, it's alive, which he never says that in the story, but that was, I think, the movie. I don't think he ever says that, actually. It's alive.
It's one of those pop culture things that became a Mandela effect, possibly.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's never even said, and the reason I know is because I have a chapter of Frankenstein in my book, and I couldn't find that source. So, anyways, the concept of Frankenstein is they take all these different body parts, put it together, and animate it through the use of electricity. Frankenstein is technically a homunculus because he's created through the laws of nature. It's not like a golem, which is created from the clay. Frankenstein comes from different body parts of humans, natural nature, and is animated through a natural mean, not magical, because electricity, unless we want to get into the, is fire, we're talking about the eternal flame, is fire conscious? I think I read that one time too, where fire itself is shows some sort of consciousness in some sort of weird way. And when you observe fire does its own thing. And we know that because fire does its own thing when it's going through towns and ravaging entire landscapes. I mean, it'll obliterate it. And
there's a reason why.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, there's a reason why in so many religions it's a central part of it. And also, if you think about just our bodies, like we have that natural heat to us as well, just from being alive. Anything does. So I do think that there's something to that. The fire in a lot of these religions is said to represent, the goddess or Hestia, or the only child of God, the female child of God, for whatever reason. So I don't know. It could definitely be conscious for all we know. I never really thought about that too much.
So I'll send you the lightning stuff, the electric universe theory stuff after we get off. But I just want to say that this would be absolutely terrifying if we ever did have. I mean, I'm glad they wiped these things out, because you know how scared I'd be if there was a beaver that was 5 feet tall. I mean, and beavers are kind of assholes too, aren't they? Like they like.
I'm not sure. I've never met one.
They like to block like waters, and like they flood people's lands because they'll block an entire like little river or something, or like a creek or something, and they'll just cause havoc because they want to take it, and they just can't see a running body of water. They always have to like stop it from running, I guess. But dude, imagine seeing this thing coming towards you, like a huge beaver. How terrifying would that be?
That's the thing, is like that. So did they eliminate these for that reason as well, or is it just greed? Because basically the idea behind it is that their fur was waterproof, so that's why they overhunted them, because they were just in the trade of selling these fur boots and fur hats and fur coats that were completely waterproof to people back then.
Oh, that makes sense. So, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Like, why did the dodo bird go extinct? Dodo bird extinction, because that was another interesting one. Like, What's
That's
so
supposed to be for food, I guess, but I don't know.
the dodo bird? Here, let's look up why the dodo. So the dodo became extinct less than 80 years later because of the deforestation, hunting, and destruction of their nests by animals brought to the island by the Dutch. The dodo may not have always been flightless.
The Dutch merchants is what they're missing there.
Really? So
I mean,
over.
so these merchant people, if we're talking about the East and West India Company, they weren't allowed to actually have citizenship back in their homeland, but for some reason they would get these charters from the leaders to be able to have these new trade cities or establishments in the New World or wherever they were going, and then they were able to be citizens there. And they had special privileges, once again, trading privileges where they didn't have to like pay taxes on the land because they're actually not allowed to own land, which is why our modern society, no one owns land because it allows these rules to be applied to the current system that's set up, especially in the United States. But yeah, they weren't allowed to be citizens in their own country a lot of the time.
When
So they had to go out and do
16th
this stuff.
century seafarers stumbled across Mauritius, nestling in the midst of the Indian Ocean, they found themselves in island paradise, turquoise waters. So cloning doesn't work on birds? I'm telling people, birds aren't real, bro. Birds work for the CIA. All right. Don't at me. Anyone who's gonna write me an email and tell me that they've seen a baby pigeon, that's fine. Some birds are real. Not all birds are real. So scientists would now, in theory, have cells that contain dodo DNA. Cloning doesn't work for birds, so it's not an option. Why doesn't cloning work on birds? Why doesn't cloning work on birds? See, this is the stuff this is why people tune into the One-on-One podcast, because they need to understand why cloning doesn't work on birds. It doesn't work for birds. Cloning a species requires access to an egg cell that's sufficiently developed so it can be fertilized. This stage is hard to capture in avian species because eggs are encapsulated in a hard shell. Then there's the problem of reintroducing a cloned embryo back into the body. Wow, that's crazy, bro.
Yeah, I never heard that before.
In mammals, the edited genome, one that resembles the extinct species, is transplanted into an egg cell of its closest cousin and developed in an embryo. The embryo is then brought to life inside the surrogate womb of a living species, a method akin to cloning. But you can't do that with the bird because it's in a shell. They can't recreate the egg. So therefore, you can't bring the birds back. And that's why birds have never been real since the beginning. Okay? That's bizarre, bro. See, I learned something. I was today years old when I learned that.
Yeah, I didn't know about that either.
Wow. So here.
So what do you think? What do you think the whole idea behind the Tartaria thing is? Like you asked me earlier.
There's so many facets to it, bro, and I find it all interesting, and I hadn't thought about it the way that you presented it to me today. Honestly, well, like this star forts and this aligns with this, and that's why I said it's multifaceted. What I think, I don't believe a lot of it, and the reason I don't believe a lot of it is because it's too complex in my opinion. Because, but there are holes in the whole. There are holes in the whole narrative of, the orphan trains and all those kids, and where did they come from? Like, where did they show it? Like, were that many people just giving their kids up? And is the orphan train narrative like how they've painted it to us with this Tartarian narrative of like they were just shipping kids out by the dozen and hundreds to just these cities and then just giving them jobs and they were just repopulating the cities? It wasn't like that?
It seems like it was. I mean, one thing, I was looking at the original Encyclopedia Britannica from like 1771, looking into Nuremberg, Germany, because for some reason it says that there were 2 pyramids there. But anyways, in that same Nuremberg,
What?
in that same Nuremberg description, it actually mentions foundlings for some reason. Like they're talking about foundlings back then too, like as if it's been just some situation they've had for a long time. And once again, think about the symbology of the cuckoo bird, which is popular with these people, basically having other people raise their kids for them. So I mean, is that hinting at that these kids are actually created? Is it hinting at something similar to the Bach saga, like, where like one person is actually having multiple wives and then sending their own children out to work these places?
Well,
Possibly.
they didn't have wives. It was 22,000 something people. It was 22,000 people for one child, which was the whole military industrial complex. It wasn't about conquering and killing. It was actually about procreation. That was the whole thing. And that's why a lot of the words that we get in the military industrial complex are like seamen or infantrymen or, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure I could come up with a whole bunch of different ones that are kind of sexual innuendos where it's like, he's a seaman. Yeah. Like that sort of thing. And it's like, that's the whole.
When I think about it, I think more along the lines of, I know it's probably not related to the Bach saga, but just what I took from it was the idea that, like, for example, Genghis Khan, everyone has their DNA, or Charlemagne or whatever else. So it's like it's one of these situations where we do have physical evidence that these people did have tons of children for whatever reason, and now it's like a main part of people's DNA. So when I think about these foundlings or these orphans, that's kind of what I'm thinking is, did one or a small group of people just have a bunch of children with, all these different women, and that's the result of it. But that does seem extremely unlikely, especially with the numbers. It just doesn't seem feasible at all. It's more likely that they literally just, their parents were killed in wars and stuff like that intentionally by this group of controllers, once again, to take away the promise that they were given, which is, if you do this, you'll have your own piece of land. And then once too many people start getting that one piece of land that they were promised, they run out, or they don't, or they notice that once people become stagnant, they start to think, right? If everyone's living on their piece of land, they have everything they want, they start to think like, well, okay, this isn't exactly how I thought it was going to be. I thought I could keep moving up. There's nowhere to move up to anymore. So then they start thinking about rebelling against the leaders, right?
Yeah. So they got to get wiped out in order to not think like that again and then start over again. And it's like,
exactly.
Now maybe they haven't done it now because of access to the internet. Or like
that, but they still are doing it. Think about Canada, for example, right now. What's taking place in Canada? They're shipping like tons of Indian people over there who are willing to work these jobs and do these things, while the Canadians that live there, who are now cashing in on the promise that they were given to have houses and businesses and stuff, all those businesses are going out of business. The houses are getting taken away from the people. Now these new people are getting pushed in, and the Canadians become like these second-class citizens for a while. But then, of course, once these Indians start cashing in, then they'll be cast aside as well, and the Canadians might be brought back, or it might be a different group of people.
Yeah.
So like the same concept is just used over and over again. Now, whether that's human nature or if it's an actual like plan is up for debate. But I mean, if that happens over and over again, there has to be some sort of conscious effort to it, right?
Yeah.
You would think.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. So maybe not even wipe the people out, just infiltrate them and flood them so much with other cosmologies, other gene pools, essentially, to where you then just dilute the people and destroy it from within, sort of thing. Because I mean, that's the whole order out of chaos. Just send it. Whatever happens. Forget what the internet has to say, because it seems like even with the internet, you still can't do much. I mean, they're censoring the internet too on their side. And speaking of censoring, a lot of people have complained about, you're censoring certain words and certain things, and I hate hearing the cuts in the audio. Listen, you little bitch, and that's for all the people who are complaining about it. You have to censor, not just self-censor, but you have to censor nowadays, because these platforms that you're listening to us on want to take us off, and they're looking for we're already shadow banned to hell. All right, we're already shadow banned to the tits. And if we give them any inch to ban us from these platforms, they will. So if you don't want to hear the cuts or you don't want to hear this, go to Rumble or go to Rockfin where I post and people don't even listen to it on those platforms. So I give you an option and you don't use the option. And if you're not going to use the option, shut the up. You know what I'm saying? Like, well, I'm tired of hearing about it. So I just want to get that off my chest. But yeah, no, dude, that's
censorship does suck. I mean, a lot of the people, even with social media and stuff like that, you'll be surprised to know that a lot of the people who are popular and who just seem to pop out of nowhere and like who are getting promoted because, yeah, there's a deliberate effort to people who are not involved in this. They're pretty much shadow banned, like what you're saying. But a certain group of people have known, you can call them the Kohanim, the Cohens. Like they're, if you're like a descendant of these people, then you're basically like placed in, and you're like, I'll stop describing it because it's a waste of time. But let's go back to Canada for a second. But so I didn't really describe that very well. I don't think is more of what I'm saying is like the Canadians who basically owned the businesses and had the houses and stuff like that. They were basically living completely self-sufficiently. Like they were comfortable. They had their own setup. It was like, you know, they're solid by themselves. They have a business, they have a house, they have their family, blah, blah, blah. So them closing down their businesses and raising the prices on stuff and importing these people to take those jobs over who are willing to work for less and who are getting programs to like move into these houses because of certain privileges now makes the Canadian people no longer self-sufficient. They're relying on the government now. They're relying on the government to stay alive and take care of their families. Like if someone has diabetes, for example, like they literally need the government to survive. So it's taking away that independence and making them rely and like pacifying them, making them weak to where they literally cannot rebel. Once again, we were talking about this earlier. Yeah. The same thing happened in Chicago, for example. Like if we're talking about the Great Fire of Chicago in 1871, you have to think of the context of what was happening before the Great Fire of Chicago. So we have the Civil War in the 1860s, right? So people were basically promised with like these cities like Chicago, New York, San Francisco, all these places. They were told by the government, hey, sell your farmland to us, come to the big city, and you'll have this great, amazing paradise life where everything's going to be perfect once you get here. So what did they do? They sold their farmland. They took the chance. They moved to the city for a better opportunity because the farm wasn't working out. It's like another version of what we were talking about earlier, where there was another method as opposed to like exterminating them. This was like the other method, like sell us your farmland, don't rebel, just sell us your farmland, come to the city, it'll be better there. So they get rid of all that. They get rid of that life, that structure, and they move to the big city. Once they get to the big city, what happens next? The Great Fire that takes away everything from them. So now they no longer have their belongings. They no longer have that wealth that they brought to the city. It's all gone. They're now completely relying on the government. So like now they're completely under the control of the government. They need the government to survive. So if you're a farmer living in the 1860s, especially after the Civil War, and then you moved to the big city, you gave up everything. Mm-hmm. You brought what you had with you. Now all of that is gone in 1871. Now you rely completely on the government to survive next. You're pacified. Now you're literally just you're no longer thinking like, what's the concept of God? Why are we here? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
you're
no longer thinking
shit like that. Yeah, you're thinking like, oh, my daughter's literally starving to death. I need to go get bread.
Wow.
So,
which, I mean, even in some of these resets, bro, I mean, they've forced people to cannibalism. I mean, it was during the Soviet Union too. I mean, there was people eating themselves and selling human meat in markets and stuff because they couldn't eat. They couldn't, you know what I'm saying? So, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And really quick here, so the species of the you said the cuckoo bird is the family contains 150 species, which are divided into 33 genera or genera, I guess. So 33, you got the 33 there. And then the cuckoos have played a role in human culture for thousands of years, appearing in Greek mythology, which, how you were saying, they use these mythologies and these cultures to kind of, what you said, to blend in. Is that what they do with it? Like, or to mimic it in some sort of way? Because that would make sense of why there's two parallel timelines in Fomenko's chronology of like, here's the real chronology and then here's the parallel of that. And it's just a mirror of like these kings and queens and all that stuff.
Well, to me, it's still debatable about when this actually started. especially if we're just thinking in the context of mainstream history, it's hard to identify where the initial corruption was. Was it the Greeks? Was it the barbarians? Was it the Persians? Was it the Lydians? Was it, it's impossible for me at this point to say who it was that actually corrupted it first. So I give the benefit of the doubt, and I would say that the Greco-Roman religion could have been a genuine thing at one point, and then it was also just corrupted by this group, because you see the same themes within it. Because, I mean, for example, like when Alexander the Great came over and invaded the Levant and took over like the temple in Israel, one of the biggest problems that the interpreters had with this is that Jewish people stopped being circumcised because they wanted to fit into like the Greco-Roman society, because they performed like the Olympic Games or like other sports in the nude, like wrestling and everything else was performed in the nude. So Jewish people were being identified as separate because they were circumcised already. So this is actually one of the main reasons for like some of these revolts that you hear about, like the Maccabean revolt and stuff, the Maccabean revolt and stuff like that. Like they push it off as if that's not the main reason, but it's definitely one of the main reasons, because circumcision is one of the most important things within this religion. They believe that when you're circumcised, they call upon the prophet Elijah, because that person who's being circumcised at that point in time, any of them could be the Messiah. So they like have this specific ritual. It's super important.
And
when you think about that, it's like, so Greeks are allegedly older than these people, but what do Greeks believe? What is the Greco-Roman religion? Well, it's a bunch of sick, perverted people. Like, for example, like all their myths are like this chick getting kidnapped and on the Greek euro coin, one of the coins, they literally had on the back of it Europa being kidnapped by Zeus on the back of a bull. So like you have people honoring a woman getting in the European Union. So it's like, which side is the bad guy, which side is the good guy, because you have these weird things on both sides. So it's like, that's what I'm saying, it's hard to identify where it actually started. But
because it's all been perverted since the beginning. It's been inverted. I mean, and that's
I want to show you before we wrap things up, since I brought up the pyramids in Nuremberg earlier. I'll show you what I was talking about real quick. So this is the 6th edition. So this one's like from, I think, 1812 or something. But it starts in the 2nd edition. The 1st edition from 1771 just says Nuremberg, and it's like where my mouse is. It's about that long. But then after the 2nd edition, up until like the 8th edition, all of them say this. So it goes into extreme detail about the city. Very, very, very detailed description of everything. But what's fascinating is right here. It says, on the new bridge, which is said to have cost 100,000 guilders, which is a form of currency, are 2 pyramids, on the top of one of which is a dove with an olive branch in her bill, and on the other, an imperial black eagle. So that's all that's said about this, and there's nothing else mentioned about it ever.
Have you found anything?
So this is the only thing that I found so far, and it's very disappointing. So let me bring it up real quick. I don't know what to think about it.
That's interesting.
Because what I was looking for is I went to all the old maps of Nuremberg, which it has like 15 different names, which makes it impossible to look stuff up. And I was looking for bridges that could, first of all, be that size to be able to fit pyramids on it, and second of all, just if they slipped up on any of the old maps, because they showed details of everything. I haven't found it yet. So these are pictures of this is Karlsbruck in Nuremberg, which is also known as Charles Bridge. So it's interesting because you see these 2 obelisks on the bridge, and they do actually have the dove with the olive branch and then the imperial black eagle on top of an obelisk.
Interesting.
But what's fascinating is that in this same book, when you look up pyramid, it doesn't describe an obelisk. It describes it like goes into extreme detail about like a ridiculous amount of detail about the Great Pyramids, like the size of them, gives all the measurements and everything like that. But it doesn't mention anything about it potentially being an obelisk. So the people writing this book at that time period clearly knew what they were describing when they're talking about a pyramid. So are these the actual things that are on the top of them, and they've just been moved to something else?
You're wrong, Shem, and they actually are obelisks, and we're just seeing the tip of the obelisk, and it might be that a pyramid is an obelisk. You know what I'm saying?
No, that's what I was thinking too, because like the top of it definitely is a pyramid, and this bridge is definitely not big enough for pyramids. I mean, there's no debate about that. So if anything, it'd have to be wider, and maybe this used to be a pyramid. Like, I mean, I don't know what the excuse would be. Nothing really makes sense in this. The other thing is that, let me see if I can pull it up real quick.
No.
On some of the old depictions of Nuremberg, it says like Nuremberga or Nuremberga. I don't know if you've ever heard the theory of the lost city in America called Nuremberga. So it's completely possible that this. No, hold on.
So
It's completely possible that this was like just another city they're describing, and for whatever reason, it's just been transferred. Like the name has been transferred, which in the tradition of the people that we're describing, the interpreters, whenever they discover a new city or a new body of water or something like that, they do name it after old ones that they came from. It's like literally the tradition, which is why we have the same cities in like every state or, you know, various places around the world, because it's like an actual tradition, an actual law within their oral tradition.
well, it says here in Nuremberg, a city that rose from the ashes after World War II. So that's an interesting thing to say. Rising from the ashes. You know, maybe that's why they did destroy it during World War II. They want to get rid of the pyramids and everything else, because it seems like when a lot of these conflicts happen throughout the world, look at this cathedral here that was the ancient Frankenshire and the main market plot in 1946. So they literally leveled everything out around it. This weird, you know.
Oh, look at that! What's in the background there?
That looks like a. Listen,
What?
dude. Listen. That's bizarre, right? It looks like a freaking. Bro, what? Hold on.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, good find. I don't know what that is, but it looks.
You can't see it here, but.
So one thing I'm gonna work on doing going forward is that there's a channel called Kronos Media on YouTube that just a lot of times it's just footage of like aerial footage of cities from pre-World War II, sometimes after. So I'm just going to continue to scour through the footage and see if there's any slip-ups, see if I can locate anything. But this is what I was talking about real quick before we cut this off. So it says Nuremberga, which is obviously there's an R here, but like I said, there's different spellings. I'm pretty sure I did see one spelling without the R.
In the U.S.?
This is Germany, but
Okay.
in the United States, in North America, there's a legendary city called Nuremberga, which is, they say it never existed, but on old maps it's there sometimes, and it's like this massive settlement. So, I mean, I don't have any evidence to back that up whatsoever, but it does seem like that it's possible, since there's no traces of any such sort of pyramids, and these people clearly knew what they're talking about with pyramids. Let me see if I can actually pull the pyramid thing up real quick. I know I keep saying that.
I'm not finding anything on that Nuremberg thing, but Nuremberg was heavily attacked during World War II.
And it's very censored, because that's where the Nuremberg trials were too. So when you try to research into the history of it, it's like you really can't. So this is what I was talking about. So in the same, we're looking at the 6th edition, just like before, and here's the definition of pyramid. Doesn't say anything about it being an obelisk or something tiny. Then it just starts going into like people arriving to Egypt and then describing the pyramids in Egypt. But at the beginning, it talks about, in geometry, a solid standing on a triangular, square, or polygonal basis and terminating in a point at the top.
Yeah,
or
so
according to Euclid. Go ahead.
I'm saying that they know what these pyramids actually are, so it's not like a mix in like, oh, you know, I'm describing something completely different. It's like they're well aware of what a pyramid is.
Yep. Pyramids are sometimes used to preserve the memory of a singular event, sometimes blah blah blah. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. I didn't even mean to come across that. I was just looking for something else, and I think I was researching into plaster of Paris in these encyclopedias, and just happened to come across Nuremberg and saw that. So pretty fascinating. But yeah, I mean, do you have any other questions or anything?
No, I want to, like I said, once I get freed up this week, I do want to start a series and really dig into Fomenko stuff, because how we mentioned, how far down does the rabbit hole go of this false history, these false narratives, who's in power, who's orchestrating it all, who's keeping track, have they even lost track of all the lies they've told us? And even the Mandela effect is an interesting phenomenon, because it's like there, bro, was JC Penny JCPENNY or JCPNNEY? Because I seen that one the other day, and that was when I was like, nah. I remember it being Penny like PENNY, and that's one of the latest ones that got me, bro. And I don't even believe in the Mandela effect. I was like, bro, no.
The lion and the lamb one is the one that gets it for me every time, because
Who?
the lion will lay with the lamb.
I never heard that saying before.
It's just because in so many like cartoons or like religious text, or even like people just talking in religions, and even like the oral traditions, for some reason they refer to the lion and the lamb, but now it's like the wolf and the lamb or something. But as far as Fomenko goes, I just want, so basically the start, like, let's say like the start date of chronology is, you would think that would be like the most important thing. That would be like having a solid start date for something like as important as the Roman Empire, or some would even say like Genesis, for example, like having that, which Roman history is basically like the spinal column of all of our history, right? It's like that's what everything is based off. It's like we're basing this off of this because it's in relation to Rome, the Julian calendar, blah blah blah. So anyone who thinks that history is legit, like what would your argument be for the fact that we have a time period for something like as important as the foundation of Rome being within like 500 years? So we have two different dates with a 500-year separation between them. So if something like that is that important can't be figured out, how reliable is the rest of the stuff, especially when all the texts that come after that are allegedly based on that chronology being correct?
Yeah.
And people like Scaliger and maybe even Dionysius Petavius, they, once again, like on YouTube, you get the idea that they were the ones that like altered history, and they were trying to like create this fake thing. They weren't. They were asking the same questions we're asking now. This can't be right. I need to figure this out. Like Scaliger was the one who's like, okay, something's wrong here. Let's instead of doing it the old-fashioned way, let's start going off eclipses and stuff like that. So he's using wrong information because, like I said, it's based on the Roman chronology. So he's using that wrong information to date his eclipses. So that's one of the reasons why some of his dates are off. But he wasn't necessarily going in like, ha 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 ha, I'm going to trick all these people, blah blah blah. Like at some point that was corrupted. Another interesting thing about all that is that these people, when they were giving dates and stuff like that, they were like describing the exact time of day. Like they would give like the year, the month, and even sometimes the exact time of day that something happened. But for some reason, the mainstream historians that control our history now, they omit, oftentimes they don't say the month, they don't say the day, and they don't give the time of day. Like it would just be like, oh,
the year.
So it's like they're literally just cherry picking even their own, like even the guy who allegedly is corrupting all of history, they're still cherry picking from him. So who are these people doing this, and why? It wasn't Scaliger. You could argue it was Dionysius Petavius, since he was a Jesuit, and this fits into the time period where the Jesuit order seems to have been corrupted. So I don't know. I mean, but the veracity of history is definitely up for question, and for anyone to simply push off Fomenko as someone who doesn't have any integrity and is trying to like push some sort of Russian narrative, when if you would just read the books, you'd realize that he's not saying that Tartaria was a good thing, or that it even being in Russia was a good thing. He's saying that it started in Alexandria, Egypt, it moved up to Constantinople, and then it ended up being in Russia for the last iteration. Like, he's not saying everyone came from Russia, everyone's a Slav. Like, that's not what he's saying, even though that's what people want you to believe. It's not. It's just simply not true. So I don't know. I would like to get into it, but yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. I do want to get into it. I think that it'll open up other lines of thought, because there is in my opinion, a spiritual aspect to this too. How I was mentioning with the technology, how technology nowadays feels hollow and empty, and back then, like, they'd slap that Moloch statue and be like, I can fit so many babies in this thing, this bad boy right here, boom, this thing right here can pack 300 sacrifices in one day, like. And dude, there was automatons of like, there's one in particular, I think in the 16th century, of the devil, where it's like, it was this whole automaton, and and automatons are interesting because like if you go to Disney has like some of the most advanced automatons, and it's like bro, now they've gotten so good that they have facial expressions, and obviously you can tell it's a robot, but the fact that we can make that, and there's so many moving parts that need to work together in order to make that thing work. That's just, it's an amazing piece of technology. And I've always been a sucker for the click of a good button or like the click of a good switch. You know what I'm saying? Like click, 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 like the like that's why I had to buy a separate keyboard. I had to buy a mini separate keyboard that is let me turn this off. That is quiet, because my main keyboard that I use to type is literally, it's got the the ASMR.
Classic.
Yeah, it's got like the loud switches on it, and I can't be typing away while I'm on a podcast unless I mute. So I literally had to get a separate keyboard because it's way too loud. But I love that sort of thing, and I feel like that's what it was like back then, where technology, it's weird to say, but had soul. Like it had character, I guess is the way to put it, versus now where people will buy the same iPhone 3 years in a row, It's
intentionally designed to be that way today. Like there's no doubt about it. There's literally people in rooms who are like coming up with the best way to like build a house so it only lasts a certain amount of time. That way in the future we can make money again because they have to move. So
like
stuff
brutalism.
like that where this fails. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, I know where you're coming from. And the automatons are fascinating too. There's a YouTube channel who rebuilds old antique automatons. I have it featured on my Shem Jacobs channel, but yeah, I like watching that stuff. It's pretty interesting.
So we'll do this. Again, like I said, I want to do a separate series that maybe we can live stream it or something. So make sure if you're not following the YouTube channel, subscribe to One on One Podcast, subscribe to One on One Media. I am streaming on there weekly. I'm going to try and keep up a schedule. Subscribe to Tartarian Truth or Shem Jacobs, and we're going to try and do a new chronology series where we go through Fomenko's work. He's actually still alive, bro. He's still cranking out work. The dude is a beast. And like I said, I'm sure this will lead to other things, because there's much more than it's the because he gets into like the etymology of the guy's name and how that represents like something that happened in the emperor's life or whatever. It gets really, really crazy. And so hopefully next time you see us, we will be covering the first book of, is it 7 or 8 books, bro? Like how many books is it?
It's 8 books now. So a new one just came out in late last year, volume 8.
Yeah. Okay.
So
next time you see us, what's that one about? Do you know?
Basically like a summary of everything with his new, because you got to keep in mind he started this in 1971.
Wow.
So a lot of things have changed since then. So it's kind of like an update on
reconstruction of so history, fiction, or science, volume 8, reconstruction of chronology. So
yeah, actually, I haven't finished the 8th one yet. I'm probably like 300 or 400 pages in. But yeah, he doesn't get, it's definitely an easier read than the first 3, because the first 3, once you get to a certain point, it starts just becoming like,
I think we should read this one first, bro.
That'd be cool. I wouldn't be opposed to that.
Look. So this one was published September 3rd, 2023, and check out what it says. Long before the AI, a group of mathematicians headed by Anatoly Fomenko reached the same conclusion and started in 1972 the elaboration of the theory of new chronology, following the discovery by the American astrophysicist Robert Russell Newton of an important parameter D in the crazy Earth-Moon telluric system. What?
So that's the thing, is like one of his main thesis is that from the year 700 to I think it's either 1300 or 1400, if you believe mainstream chronology, the moon sped up that, like to meet the criteria, it sped up. So it's very interesting.
What in the? All right, save it, because that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, he basically says that if you combine that Newton guy and Morozov's numbers, you can fix that problem. So that's kind of like his. But we'll save it.
Saint Augustine was quite prescient, is that how you say it? Prescient, when he said, Be wary of mathematicians, particularly when they speak the truth. Henry Ford once said history is more or less bunk. So it tells you here, warning, the new chronology theory of Dr. Fomenko and team has been universally rejected by non-scientists, mainstream scholars of history who branded it not only as pseudo-historic, but also as pseudoscience. Yikes. All right, so I think we're going to start with this one. Volume 8, reconstruct. How many pages is it? It is 544.
No, it's more than that. I swear it's like 1,300 pages or something.
Oh, maybe because you have the PDF file, no?
Yeah.
It's $95 for a paperback. That's not even the hardcover. It's a paperback. I'm about to order it.
Yeah, because the PDF, I know, like one weird thing about, well, we can talk about this later, but the veracity of it, like the reliability of it, because I know some people say that it's like a psyop or whatever, but one thing is like some of the chapters and some of the words are like out of place within the books. I don't know if it's just like a bad translation of the PDF, but that kind of was suspicious. But yep. All right. Well,
we'll do it up. I'm going to order it, and I'm able to order that book because of people who subscribe to the Patreon, patreon.com/the1on1 podcast. Help me grift, help me shill, help me fund the podcast, and we're able to buy these $100 books to bring you the knowledge. Okay. You don't got to suck any around here to gain any knowledge. Just subscribe to the Patreon for $5 hairs a month, and I will give you the knowledge without the exchange of bodily fluids. So, dude, this was fun. I enjoyed it. And hopefully next time people see us, it will be on a offshoot on the channel. Make sure to subscribe to all the YouTubes. Rumble for the crybabies. Rumble, Rockfin. Go support on there. If you can't, shut up. And shirts, toplobster.com. I've got a section on there, Juan on Juan, exclusively on Top Lobster. Go on there, check that out. What else? Comic book, Chosen Juan. Get your copy of the Occultist Monday. These are ones I got to ship out. I got the Homunculus Owner's Manual. Make sure to check that out. 33 pages of goodness. I do have a Homunculus edition of the Occultist Monday coming out. It's going to be over 100 pages of straight homunk talk for those homuncophiles out there, because I know people like the homunculus talk. But check it out, tjojp.com. Shem, you want to plug your stuff? Anything else that I missed?
Kudos to you for putting in work, creating books and comic books. It's awesome.
Yeah, dude. That's what I'm here for.
Good to see.
Here to create culture.
Thanks for having me. Enjoyed the conversation. Hope we can do it again in the future.
Yeah, dude, I'm about to order that book now. As always, everyone, love each other. Don't be mean. And catch you on the next one. Bye.
Later.